But I want to start out with Cole Stangler. Cole is the Paris-based journalist and contributor to both The Nation magazine and Jacobin, among others. His website, Cole Stangler, STANGLER.com. And you can tweet him at Cole Stangler. Cole, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Tom.
Yeah, thanks for joining us from Paris. So you are there, you live there, you speak French, you have some sense of what's going on. I have read, in the kind of mainstream media, I'm reading that the Yellow Vest movement is all about we don't want to pay for a gas tax. But in Louise and I were watching France 24 over the weekend and BBC. Because you just can't get news in America on the weekends. And in both cases, they were talking about people were basically protesting the fact that the rich are getting richer and working people are getting poorer. And, it's not just the gas tax. It's basically they're protesting neoliberal economics. So what say you, Cole?
So it's true that this movement really started over the fuel tax. So you had anger mounting over the summer. Fuel prices have actually gone up pretty substantially in France, about 25% over the last year. You had a call to protest on November 17th. So a big day of action to protest against taxes, against the fuel tax. This is something that really affects working people. If you do the math, a gallon of fuel in France comes out to over $6 per gallon. So it's a really significant cost on people's lives. 25% increase over the last year. In addition to that, the government wanted to apply this 10% increase effective 2019. So you had this initial call to protest over the fuel tax, calling for the government to drop this fuel tax increase. However, it's clear that since that first day of protest on November 17th, where you had over 200,000 people coming out across the country, since that first day of protest, this movement has really come to encompass a much broader discontent with Emmanuel Macron and a much broader frustration with really the rising cost of living. Working class people in France say, why should we be, expected to pay another 100 euros or so per month in gas, while at the same time the super rich are getting this massive tax cut? That's one of the landmarks of Emmanuel Macron's presidency so far, is cutting taxes for the super rich. So you have this trigger of the gas tax, but it's clear that we're at the moment now where it's a much bigger movement that is really articulating a deep discontent with the president and the way that he treats working class people.
There is a system or a method or whatever policy that has been widely applauded, in fact, to raise gas taxes in a way that wouldn't produce this kind of blowback. And it's called fee and rebate, which is where you raise the taxes, but 100% of that money gets recycled back to people in the bottom 80-90%. And so, the gas tax might go up 25%, but, you're going to get $100 a week or a month check from the government or something like that. Has there been any discussion about fee and rebate there?
That's not a policy I've seen floated in the moment, but, I think it's important to point out here because it really raises the question, when you talk about opposition to the fuel tax, I think, especially if you're sitting in the United States, you see this protest, I think it's very easy to transplant you're kind of, especially right-wingers, this kind of anti-government, Tea Party-esque kind of ideology onto the protesters. But I think it's important to point out the kinds of people that are protesting here, they're not protesting against the idea of intervention in the economy. They're not protesting against the idea of the state trying to address the environmental crisis. What they're protesting is the fact that it should be done on the backs of the working class alone, that it should be on the backs of regular people. The idea is, why shouldn't the rich be expected to pay for this? We're the ones that are being asked to pay for this transition, that are bearing the costs of your policies.
Yeah,
and that's the real important point here.
Yeah, at the same time that Macron is doing the classic neoliberal trick of massive tax cuts and deregulation for the billionaires, the big corporations, and cutting social services and suppressing wages for average working people, and now hitting them with a 25% increase in fuel taxes on top of that. How do you think this? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, this is a movement that's also sprung up from parts of French society that are not accustomed to protest. That's why I think it's captured, so much attention in France. It's also why the government has actually conceded on this initial demand about canceling the fuel tax. They've actually now canceled the fuel tax increase, a 10% increase for 2019. It's conceded. It sparked a lot of fear, and that's because this is coming from people that are not your typical, left-wing or labor demonstrators. These are coming from people that live outside of major cities. That's the first point. Coming from rural areas, coming from what in France is known as the peri-urban areas. So these are basically, outskirts of suburbs that transition between, rural areas and more suburban areas. These are coming from people that are not terribly political, and I think that's what has people frightened. And this is the backlash against. Right. Macron's first year in office.
And those are the areas where people would be more likely to have a long commute to work. Because they're not living in the city center. Although France does have a pretty good public transportation system, but I'm curious. This is my understanding is, Cole. We're talking with Cole Stangler, the Paris-based journalist for The Nation and Jacobin. My understanding is that this was, to a large extent, organized on social media, specifically Facebook. Do I have that right? And has there been any evidence? I mean, we're seeing here in the United States now that 21 out of 22 million comments or something like that to the FCC saying blow up net neutrality were entirely coming from bots, apparently corporate bots. And were totally faked. Is there any evidence that social media has been manipulated in a way that might make these demonstrations worse than or larger than otherwise expected?
We've seen speculation about that. I haven't seen any conclusive evidence, to really convince me that's the case. There was a BuzzFeed piece recently that made the connection between Facebook and the protests. It is clear, though, that this protest was organized mostly on Facebook and social media. That's why it's so remarkable. That's why it's also very messy. That we shouldn't, romanticize this too much. You have some real progressive demands that are being circulated among these Facebook groups. And again, no, real lack of structure here as well, which is, again, why it's so fascinating and kind of frightening.
Now, it sounds like there's the French equivalent of the Black Bloc that is participating in this, and perhaps even the French equivalent of the Proud Boys, that both the left-wingers who like to smash the windows of fancy stores and the right-wingers who like to go out and turn it into anti-immigrant stuff in their respective spheres have been doing this. Are those roles being exaggerated by the media, particularly here in the United States? Is that actually a real phenomenon?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that you do have groups of the far right, and you have kind of extreme anarchists as well that have come to the demonstrations, mostly in Paris. Again, I think it's important to emphasize Paris is the center of media attention in France. It's also the center of attention, from abroad, and that's what gets the attention. But if you look at the rest of the country, I mean, Paris, you had, I think, 10,000 demonstrators this most recent Saturday. You had, tens of thousands of other demonstrators across the country where you don't have these incidents taking place. You don't have as much of the violence. So you do have the far right. You do have some anarchist taps into it. But by and large, the supporters of this movement, the people that are coming out of protest, tend to be not very political people, and that's why this is such a unique movement here. Absolutely fascinating. Cole Stangler, the Paris-based journalist, contributor to The Nation and Jacobin. ColeStangler.com is his website. You can tweet him at Cole Stangler, Stangler. Cole, thanks so much for dropping by today and laying all this out for us. Thanks so much for having me. My pleasure. It's always great talking with you, Cole, and keep safe. Merci. Thank you.